Psalm chapter 2. And while you're turning there, I just want to take one more moment to remind you that this next Sunday is going to be the time that we're going to spend outside of service. So again, bring your chair, and it looks like it's going to be a bit chilly, so bring your jacket. Most importantly, bring someone. Right? Take opportunity to invite people to church. I would just challenge you and ask you the question, is that something that we do regularly as a church? Do we invite people in and say, hey, you know what? This is something that I find helpful, and you might as well. I would encourage you to invite people to come next week. Throughout the Old Testament, God delivers his people. He carries his people into the place that he would have them. And time again, he tells them, I want you to recognize the way that I've carried you through this by setting up a marker. And that way, every time you pass by and your children say, what is that marker? What is that stand of rocks stacked on top of each other? You can remind them of the way that your God has delivered you. We sing in Be Thou My Vision. Not Be Thou My Vision, in Come Thou Fount. We sing the line that a lot of people sing and don't know what it means, and they say, here I raise my Ebenezer. Right? Okay, so what that refers to is that Israel is told to raise up a stone and set it on its end, and to call it their Ebenezer. And when they pass by and their children say, well, what does this one mean? You would say, by God's grace and strength, he has brought us thus far. Hereto by thy help I've come. Right? And so that is something that we want to do in part next week. It is going to be in part a short recognition of the anniversary of our church and how God has been faithful to not only give us this corporate worship body, but to sustain us through. And so we want to do that next week. It's going to be an awesome week, and I'm hoping that you'll be there, you'll bring someone, and we also have a little bonus surprise that I'm not going to tell you about because you got to show up to find out what it is. Psalm 2. Riveting. You'll not sleep for a week. Me either. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs, and the Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree the Lord said to me. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them into pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O king, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. This psalm begins with the nations plotting against God. The world that he has created, those people that he has brought into being and provided with life, practicing not the worship that he is due, but instead practicing sin and raging against him. And it begins with an interesting question. It says, why? Why do they rage? And why do the people plot in vain? It doesn't make any sense. If ever there was an act of futility, the act of futility would be to rage against God. The creator, sustainer, ruler of all things. to stand before him and shake your fist and to call out God. This is a terrible example, but here's a quick example of what this made me think of. When we were in Toronto, Joe, who is here, had an office across the hall from mine. He was our youth pastor there. And when Caleb was little, Caleb was only maybe just barely old enough to talk. We're talking on the verge of first words. And he walks into the office and he looks at Joe and he puts his fist up and he says, "I'm going to fight you." And of course, Joe said this is no longer a safe work environment, and he called the appropriate authorities. But it wasn't just one time. Like, this was a common thing that he would walk into the office and call Joe out. And Joe did exactly what you're doing. He laughed at him. Why is it funny? Well, because Caleb is just still sort of waddling along, barely even able to get the words out. "I'm a fight you," not even grammatically correct, but cute. And Joe is a grown man and a kind of I go to the gym kind of guy, and this is all futility, to the point that it is humorous for him to call him out that way. But he did it regularly. He did it with this just assumption that hey, this is about to go down and I'm starting this fight. And this is the same way that the nations come against God. They come against God and they say, "Listen, I've had enough of this. I am going to come against you." And what does God do? In verse 4, he does what Joe did, and he laughs. Not only does he laugh, but he holds them in derision. He derides them. He mocks them. He sees the world rising up against, and he looks at them and he just says, "You have no idea how small you are in this." I think this is important for us to understand in a couple of ways. One, it's important for us to understand because there are those who would be in the process of standing and raging against God himself. And maybe you're here this morning and maybe there's something inside of you that just says, "I don't want to be here. I have been coerced to be here. I'm here out of just social obligation, or I've been forced to be here. But I don't want to be here. I don't want anything to do with this God thing. I don't want anything to do with this message. I don't believe in it. I've got my own way." And I would encourage you to understand that you cannot rage against God or plot against him in vain. It is not going to go well for you. But maybe you look at it and you say, listen, I'm not buying in, I'm not sold on this whole Christian thing, but I am a long way from raging against God. Some might say, listen, it's not that I'm angry with God, because I don't even believe that there is a God to be angry with. Okay? So I'm holding this bit of neutral ground. I'm not fighting against God the way that this scripture here seems to say that we are fighting against God. I am just kind of here. What do they say as they plot against God? He gives us a little snippet into their conversation. Of all of the things that he could talk about, because the ways that people rebel against God are many. And there are a lot of different ways that he could point out. He could say a number of things about what it looks like to rage against God, what it looks like to rebel against him. But instead, he gives us only one thing that these rebels would say. "Let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us." Freedom. To view God as a limiting factor that I would have myself freed from. If you're one who's here today saying, listen, I'm not angry with your God, I don't even believe in your God, I'm holding a neutral position, I would say to you, you are not doing something other than what is talked about in verses 1 and 2. You are doing exactly what is talked about in verses 1 and 2, because in verse 3, it tells us that the goal of what they are doing is not to try to plan a war against God. They're not trying to say, let us find the holy hill, and let us storm the holy hill, and let us take it over. Instead, what they're saying is, let us cast away these bonds that we see him as placing on us. We see God as a limiting thing, and we want to be free from that limitation. This is what happened with Eve in the garden, is it not? When Satan seeks to tempt, to confuse, what's the very first thing he does to the very first people? He goes in and he points out the limiting factor of God. Did God really say that you could not eat of the fruit of the garden? Not only does he point out the limiting factor, but he also amplifies the limiting factor beyond what it actually is. Right? He could have come in a more honest way and said, hey, wow, you can really eat of anything that's here in the garden except for that one tree. That's not so bad. But instead he comes in, he's basically like, so God created you with a need to eat, and then he told you can't eat the food? That doesn't make any sense at all. You were going to die. What kind of God would present you with need, sustenance, and then tell you that you can't bring the two together? That's not fair. And he amplifies the limiting nature of what it means to rest in worship and in trust of God. And when he amplifies it, even at that point, Eve is able, she understands what's going on. She says, no. He didn't say that we couldn't have anything to eat. He just said we couldn't eat of that one tree because we would die. And Satan says, well, you're not going to die. You're going to be like God. You're going to be like God. You will be able to discern. You'll have a knowledge between what is good and what is evil. And Eve looked at the fruit, and seeing that it was good for food, she ate it. Why? Why did she eat it? Because she wanted to be able to discern for herself the difference between good and evil. She didn't want to rest under the teaching of God, God who had come to her and said, I have given you all things. Just rest under my decision of what I will declare to be right and wrong. And it's a simple one. Just trust me. But Eve didn't want to trust God. Eve wanted to do this thing for herself. She wanted to be able to say, I need the opportunity to discern right and wrong. Maybe my idea of right and wrong isn't the same as what God's would be. I want the knowledge of good and evil so that I can make decisions for myself on what is right and what is wrong rather than listening to God. And she gave to her husband, and he ate, and they raged, and they plotted in vain. And they said to one another, let us burst off his bonds and cast away his cords from us. That was the sin of Adam and Eve. That is the sin of our own hearts today. I want to do it my way. I want to think for myself. When I look to God, all I see is what I can't do. It's a dangerous thing to preach about your kids in front of your kids. And I had kind of hoped that I had another 10 years before this would be a thing, but anyone in here have or have had kids? And they come in and they're like, there's nothing to play with. And you're like, are you kidding? Because we could back the dump truck up and we could just fill it full of all of these toys, because we can't go anywhere in the house for all of the stuff that's yours for the purpose of entertaining you. And you know how much nicer our house would be if we didn't have it full of things to entertain the children. I got a lot of raised eyebrows and nodding heads from mothers. But instead, what do they see? They only see what they don't have. And as a parent, you know what? Listen, I could go get you that thing out of the I just made myself old. That thing out of the quarter machine at the grocery store. Do they even have those anymore? I don't know. Okay, they do. I could go get that for you, but you know what? It's going to happen. It's going to break in like 2 seconds, or you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, oh, it wasn't what I thought it was, and you're going to be bored with it, and you're going to put it off, and what are you going to do? You're going to be right back where you began. And this is the way oftentimes we look at God, and we look at God and we say, well, all I see are the limiting factors. All I see are the things that I'm not able to do. I can't bring myself to see what it means to fellowship with the Creator of all things, with a holy being, with a God who paid the price for my sin with his own Son so that I could fellowship with him. Instead, all we see are the can-nots. And we miss the idea of life abundant and eternal. This is what the nations are doing when they're raging. I know it would be easy to read these first 3 verses and just say, hey, this sounds like something about armies, and it has really nothing to do with me today or the people that I deal with today, but it has everything to do with us today. This is just the heart of man. The heart of man who rebels. God doesn't consider it a third-party position. God considers it war against him. We've said this before. We'll say it over and over and over again because it is a saying that just needs to be brought into check. People oftentimes say, well, but you know what? God knows my heart. That is at the same time the most comforting and the most terrifying statement that any one person can make. When we are repentant and humbling ourselves before God and saying, God, I understand that I am not perfect. I understand that I am not doing this on my own, and that everything that I have that is good is a gift from you, and it is you that calls me to yourself, and it is you that is working in me both to will and to do your good work. But my flesh, I am contributing the failure and the struggle in this battle, and God, I need you. God sees that, and he knows our heart, and he understands, listen, I understand that you're weak, and I am going to carry you through this. But when we look to God and we say, I hear you, but I'm not interested, God still knows your heart. Oftentimes people want to take the whole God knows my heart, and what they want to do is they want to do the exact opposite of that. They want to say, I'm a pretty good person. I help people out. If someone needed the door held open for them, I would happily do that and not even complain about it. God knows my heart. No, what you're saying is God sees my outward actions, but my heart is in rebellion to him, and I want to warn you, God knows your heart. And he's not fooled by your secret actions. There was a song that came out a long time ago. I got to come to terms with these things, right? And it was really popular. I heard it sung in churches, and the whole time it was being sung in churches, this was before I had theology degrees and those kinds of things, but it was still very confusing to me. People would sing the song from a distance, and it would be sung from the stage. And I just thought, this song doesn't make any sense. God is watching us from a distance, and the point of the song is that we're supposed to be encouraged by that. But then the whole song talks about how, in reality, we are at war, but from a distance, it looks like we're getting along, and God's watching us from a distance. So either God is oblivious or incapable of understanding who we are and where we are, and from a distance just thinks that things are great. That could not be further from the truth. God knows us more intimately than we even understand ourselves, and that's why he's given us the word to show us that even though we might think that we're doing well because, hey, I'm at least not speaking out against God, I'm being a pretty good person, we might look to that and say, well, you know who's watching you from a distance at that point? It's you. But God, intimately knowing who we are, says, no, there's rebellion in your heart. And he uses things like Psalm 2 to show us that rebellion, not to break us down, but to build us up and to cause us to repent and come to him. This is the war that mankind, even those who believe, still have a tendency to push forth in a rebellion, an outright rebellion against God. And God is not thwarted. He's not concerned. He's not scared. Instead, he says this, I have set my king, in verse 6, I have set my king on Zion, on my holy hill. Now, I want to shape a mindset before we go into this last section of the passage here. There is this opportunity inside of Christianity that we really like to grab hold of, and that is to read ourselves into every passage and to make ourselves the hero or the main character of every passage of Scripture. And there are times when we are meant to be encouraged by the way God works through other people. But let me just put it out there. The hero in Scripture is God. This is his way of showing us about himself and about ourselves. We are not the heroes in Scripture. And so what's going to be tempting is with this mindset of I'm the hero and I'm the central focus of what's going on. And everything that happens to every person in Scripture is also going to be promised to me or happening to me. We're going to look at that and we're going to say, and if ask me, verse 8, ask me and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession, and you shall break them with a rod of iron. Now therefore, O king, be wise and be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, rejoice with trembling, kiss the Son, lest he would become angry. And here as God sets apart someone to be his representative, calls them his son, we might be, oh, you know what? Tim preached just about 3 or 4 weeks ago that we are also children of God, so maybe this is about me. And inside of it, I would see my authority and my need to be lifted up and worshiped. And what I would see is I would see the nations being called to caution. Do not come against God's anointed, me, the Son, lest I become angry. That's not at all what's happening here. We don't need to read ourselves into every passage of Scripture. Instead, what is happening here is called a typology. All right? Now this is a big word we can break down and make it simple. Ology, the study or science of, type meaning different kinds of things. So a typology is a different kind of studying or seeing a different kind of a thing. And here he is called aside a king. It doesn't say that this is a Psalm of David, but presumably a Psalm of David or one of those earthly kings that is writing this to say, listen, in the old covenant, we live in a very physical covenant. We are a physical people and a physical nation that are being physically cursed and blessed so that we show the world spiritual truths. And when a nation would come against, in a physical way, an army attacking God's people, God would allow them to be defeated when they were far from Him, thus physically showing what it means for the heart to be far from God and overcome by the sins of this world. And He would deliver them, thus showing His power and strength to push sin and this world out of the heart of the believer. A very physical thing. And so this is spoken most assuredly by a physical king in the old covenant who would say, you have set me apart, you have called your nation to be the nation that would exemplify who you are, that all the nations of the world would be blessed and that they would be called to worship you. You will raise up an army and you will remove this enemy from us. And although that is truly what is being said here, it is only a type. Because this goes further than that. And in most typologies, and by most I mean all of them, but there might be one or two that I've missed, and so I just want to be careful. when it comes to a typology, the archetype, the number one, the primary type of all the types is going to be the person of Jesus himself. We see this as the Israelites go into the promised land, right? Moses delivers them out and guides them along and gives them everything that they need along the way. But Moses does not deliver them into the promised land. Instead, it is Joshua who takes them across the border into that promised land. Joshua, whose name in Hebrew would be Yeshua, who would later have that translated in Greek to Iesu, which is the name that we use for Jesus in the Greek New Testament. In fact, when Joshua, there's only 3 or 4 times that Joshua is mentioned in the New Testament, and it is Iesu, exactly like it would be for Jesus. And so Joshua stands as this prototype for the archetype. He is the first type that comes along, and he delivers God's people into the promised land, because later there is one by his same name who would deliver God's people in a new covenant fashion, as opposed to the old covenant fashion, into the promise of God. And so that is how typologies elevate Jesus and use human life to tell the story of Jesus. And that is exactly what is happening here. This king has been told, these are the things that I am going to do. I am going to deliver my people. That is the promise that I make all through the books of the law, and that is promised again all through the prophets. And here it's being promised again, but now in an ultimate form. And we know this because it goes beyond what we would actually call for from an earthly king at this point in time. He has set him apart. In verse 7, he will decree, or this is the decree that is given. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I've begotten you. Ask me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and to the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O king, this is referring back to the kings of verses 1 and 2, those who would rage against him and plot in vain, which we have already determined is exactly how it is that our hearts work. So we can understand that O kings means those who would be rulers of self. Therefore, O kings, be wise and be warned, O rulers of the earth. Those who would say, I need my own space to determine what is right and what is wrong. I am not going to follow Scripture or the way of God, but I need to determine it for myself. Be warned. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way. For his wrath is quickly kindled. But blessed are those who take refuge in him. We have 2 options with God. We can be slain by the sword of Christ, or we can be guarded by the sword of Christ. That's what it's telling us here. Verse 12 is showing us both options. The sword of Christ can either be our demise or our salvation. It can come against us or it can fight for us. The difference is determined by our humble submission to him. Our saying, your way and not mine. The truth is this. All humanity wages war against God. That's the product of sin, and it's the nature of the human heart. We wage war against God. And we rightfully deserve to be at the point of the sword. But God, in his love and mercy, has given us opportunity, has given us a second chance, that chance to repent and to come before Him and say, listen, I understand that I can't do this on my own. I don't need to do this on my own. If I'm left to make the decisions, I'm going to mess this whole thing up. I just want to follow you. I just want to humble myself before you, and I just want to rest in you. And in saying this, He doesn't look to us and He doesn't say it's too late or that's not enough. He doesn't say prove yourself. He just takes us from the point of the sword to the handle. So that rather than being our demise, it becomes our protection. Paul tells us in Philippians that there will come a day when every knee will bow and tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of the Father. Some will bow because of humility and repentance, humbling themselves before God. Some will bow because they have been broken by the sword and by judgment, and they have been called into surrender. Don't wage war in vain. At this point, we have opportunity to come together in communion. And I want to explain to you what communion is before we practice it. The Bible gives us two ordinances that we practice as a church. The ordinance of baptism, which is that initial moment when we say, I am not going to do this on my own anymore. I am going to rest in the knowledge, the wisdom, and the power of God as my guide. And I want the world to know that this is the decision that I have made, and we are baptized and initiated into that relationship. It's a public appeal to tell the world, this is what I've come to. And then there is communion, which is a very similar message, but it is a message of continuation. It is in part a way to say, that message that I gave at my baptism, I still continue in today. And I hold fast to that decision, and I will remain in that decision. At the same time, the way, this symbology of the way that we practice communion is to take the bread and to take the cup and to say, I can continue in this because of what He has done for me. He has done these things. He has given His body and His blood on my behalf. And this is quite literally, as they might say, kiss the cup, an opportunity for us in worship to kiss the Son. And to say, not my will, but your will. Not for my elevation, but for yours. And so if you are here this morning and you are a believer who has made that initial statement of, I have chosen to follow Jesus, and to declare that before the world, this table is open for you. We'll pass things out, and we would like for you to take communion with us. If that is not a decision that you have made, we would ask that you would abstain from it for now. But I would plead with you to make that decision for Christ.